Thank you all for joining today. And, it's interesting. I was thinking about the title of this presentation this morning, and you know what? I think PR is dead, so we're done. Oh, no, just kidding. Let's move on. All right. So first, the shameless promotional item, just to fill you in a little bit about Lewis. We're a global communications firm, integrated communications firm. What's interesting about us is through acquisition and organic growth, we now offer services not only across the PR spectrum, but full across the PR, digital, and marketing spectrum. So everything from developing websites to doing demand generation programs, Twitter, social, you name it, we do it. Thus concludes today's promotion. A quick warning. So we are primarily a B2B tech firm. My roots are in B2B tech, among other things. So this presentation was developed primarily in the context of B2B tech companies. That said, the basic principles, I think, are relevant across a broad swath of industries. But when I get into examples of certain things, they will be within the context of B2B tech. So if you're in like consumer, please accept my apologies. So why do we constantly hear that PR is dead? Over the years, we've seen this over and over again. Back during the internet bubble, I remember when the .com bubble imploded, and all these magazines that used to be as thick as phone books, which I've just dated myself, I grew up with phone books, things like Business 2.0 and the industry standard, they all disappeared, and people thought, oh my God, the media's dried up, PR is dead. And shortly after that, CEOs and chief marketing officers, they all were fixated on where do marketing dollars go, and what's my return on investment, we got to get rid of this black hole. And because PR is very difficult to measure in terms of ROI, PR was dead again. And then we had the financial crisis in 2008, and just when PR was getting back to the point of proving it's still alive, we killed it again, because so much of the media either went down or moved online and thinned out their staffs, and oh my God, PR is dead again. And now today, I think we live in this world of multiple channels, tons of social channels, and everyone gets their information from Facebook. Who needs the media? Why do you need PR? So it's being killed again. But you know what? It never seems to really die. And for irrefutable proof of that, I give you this man, who managed to secure $2 billion of free earned media during the primaries and crushed a field of fairly established governors and senators. And really, his approach was relatively simple. He held events that got covered in the media. He would selectively call into shows, and they do interviews over the phone, which pretty much meant he was in charge of the message. He got lots of coverage that way, and then he'd use it to put out outrageous things, and that would get covered in the media. Next thing you know, he's buried all his opponents under an avalanche of media. So if there's one thing we can point to show that PR is not dead, it's Donald Trump. By the way, that's not an endorsement. So why are people constantly killing us poor PR people? Well, there are a couple of reasons, I think. One is it's really a what have you done for me lately profession. You can get a tremendous hit for your client or for your company in the Wall Street Journal on Monday, but on Tuesday, if your competitor shows up in some trade publication and you're not in the article, you're getting thrashed. So I think it's just a profession, for better or for worse, people are constantly fixating more on what have you done wrong than what have you done right, and people have short memories when it comes to the really good accomplishments. The ROI question is another one, and this is a fascinating topic to me because I've seen a lot of people claim, give sessions on how to measure PR ROI. I've been to actual shows and summits where people are doing presentations on measuring PR ROI. And then they never talk about ROI. They talk about measurement, but it's not ROI. The reality is you cannot practically measure the ROI of media placements. And when I say PR, I realize we have a broad range of disciplines under here. The whipping boy is usually media relations, so that's where a lot of this is skewed. And this frustrates a lot of people because, like I said, when the marketing black hole evaporated and VPs of marketing and CMOs were asked to start proving why they're spending all this money, Well, PR is a point of great frustration because it's like I said, you can't accurately measure the return on investment like you can with, for example, a demand generation program where you can take the cost of procuring a list, the cost of executing a program, see who's entered your pipeline, see who you've closed deals with, and boom, you can measure the ROI down to the penny. And PR always seems to get lost in that as well. Like PR never gets credit, for example, when someone says, oh yeah, I'll sign up for your webinar, because the person never says, oh, I'm signing up for your webinar because I've heard of you, or because I read about you the other day, I'm kind of interested in you. Instead, it tends to just be, oh, our direct email blast for the webinar is what got this person interested, so PR never gets credit. So that's another reason I think why people are constantly killing PR. It's hard to measure ROI, hence everyone questions the ROI of it. And finally, I think people, especially, again, I'm in the tech industry where you have a lot of executives who are engineers, and they look at PR and think, well, that should be easy. You know, just call up a reporter and get me coverage. And it seems like it should be easy, but it really is hard to do. And those of you on the phone who have been trying to figure out how to get the media interested in your company or your client know that all too well. So where do we see PR programs falling down? And this, you know, when I'm talking here, I'm currently an agency guy, but I've been on the client side and seen this as well. Earlier in my career, I was a reporter. So where I've seen PR programs fall down is generally the approach to the program. And I have three key things here that I'm going to dive into a little more. The first is a transactional approach to PR, and this really translated means just getting fixated on tactics. The shiny object syndrome, this gets to budgeting and where executives think money should go. And then treating PR as a silo, which really comes down to organizational structure and marketing departments. All of these speak to a common problem, which is PR, in many cases, is not viewed as the strategic discipline it is. That should actually be spanning all your marketing and corporate functions. It shouldn't just be this little tactical exercise. So let's take a look at what do I mean by transactional approach to PR. I think you know, anyone who's done PR on the phone right now or who manages PR in a company has probably experienced a lot of these dynamics. So we need to crank out more press releases. I mean, how many times have you heard that? And it's usually a function of, good God, our competition is getting more Google alerts than we are. We're losing the war. You know, let's get more noise out there. Now, there are times when it is legitimate to get more news out there if you're not effectively communicating the news. But more often than not, this is just a view of, well, we need more Google alerts. Let's get more press releases out there. The second one is really one of these things where, you know, give me news and I'll give you coverage. That's how it works. Pitch reporter news, I'll get you coverage. It's a very limited approach to media relations and getting coverage. Really good media relations comes out of non-news stuff, getting creative, coming up with big story ideas and getting included. The old number count, bean counting approach to PR, you know, get me this number of analyst briefings and this number of speaking ops, which without really evaluating what's the value of those and should we be doing this and is it even possible? If we're not paying any analysts, sorry, you're going to talk to them once a year and that's all they're going to let you do. So counting the number of briefings doesn't really get you anywhere. Or the classic, I want to know the value of each media placement. And I go back far enough where ad equivalency was the metric du jour, you know, when you'd go and see what measure the length of the article you're in and then go look at how much ad placements cost in the publication. And then you'd go to your client and say, look, we got you $6 billion worth of coverage this month. And they'd say, wow, that's great. And you'd move on. Of course, it was all nonsense. But, you know, understanding the value of an individual media placement, like I said earlier with ROI, you really can't do it. And my favorite story is we have a guy here years ago who there was a case where a large company had a backup tape fall off the back of a truck and it wasn't encrypted. And it was a really bad data breach. And he got our client, who was in the data encryption space, one quote in eWeek. And because of that quote, the gigantic company saw it, called our client, and it led to a 7-figure deal. Now, if I were to tell someone, I'll get you a quote in eWeek and it'll lead to a 7-figure deal, they'd throw me out of the room and say that's nonsense, and yet it happened, because that's the nature of PR and media relations. But fundamentally, what executives, what PR people, what everyone needs to hold on to here is to think, PR is about strategic perception setting. It's about understanding your company's story, creating your company's story, and getting it out there in a meaningful way. It's not a collection of disparate tactics, and you need to move away from this transactional approach if you want to continue to prove the value of PR and avoid claims that PR is dead. Shiny object syndrome. Boy, are we seeing that today. I'm going to take a drink of water because my throat's dry. Just to be completely transparent. Big fan of transparency. And I've literally heard this. I've heard this from a client saying, we're going to move 100% to inbound marketing because, inbound marketing is all the rage, thanks to HubSpot and other companies like that. Gosh, why should I bother with media relations? I can go straight to people over social. PR is dead. We don't need media relations. Or I need leads, and PR doesn't generate leads like Google AdWords or other programs like that. And naturally, that's because PR isn't really a lead generation program. It's an awareness function. So we live in an era where there are all sorts of new channels emerging, social channels, and all sorts of wonderful hyperbolic claims coming along, and we're seeing budget dollars being thrown around in ways where people really are losing sight of the fact that the marketing mix is a tool chest, and you don't want to just throw all your eggs in one basket behind one tool. Otherwise, you're going to build a house with a hammer and not have a screwdriver when you need one. So it's important, in this world where there are all sorts of new exciting ways to reach people, that you understand that some of the old stuff is actually really important too. And that's one of the issues, I think, with PR as well. It's an old discipline. It's like email marketing. Email gets slammed like this all the time too, and yet it works. Treating PR as a silo, and I lived this firsthand when I was on the corporate side. I was the corporate comms guy, and I sat in an office, and I was really sort of separated from the rest of the marketing department. And I worked a lot with the CEO, and I worked with him on IR, and worked with my agency, but I never really felt integrated with the rest of the marketing department. And I think that's a big mistake, and I've seen that at a lot of other companies as well, where PR is sort of treated as this separate thing where you hire someone and let them hire an agency and then just tell them to do their job. But again, PR needs to be part of the overall marketing arsenal, and when you fragment it out like this and you put PR in a silo, you run into problems, particularly today when we're talking about having so many different channels of communications. You're now going to fragment your story. You're not going to have a consistent story across all your channels because your people aren't working together. They're not integrated. You're not going to be taking advantage of the skills on your staff because you're separating out the PR people from the rest of marketing. And really, when you think about it, your PR people should have very strong writing skills, a very deep understanding of your product, your business. They should be perfectly qualified to do things like write brochures, write web copy, write email copy. So you underutilize your resources when you treat PR like a silo. And finally, it creates sort of a limited career path. And a lot of companies, and again, I'm talking B2B tech here, but because corporate comms and PR is treated as a silo, getting to like director of corporate comms is sort of the ceiling. And you don't see a lot of companies where there's a path to go from PR communications up to VP of marketing, and there really should be. So here's how the world should be. And as I was saying, PR is just a tool in the chest, and that's how we need to think about it. And it's complementary to the other tools in the chest. It's complementary to digital, direct marketing, advertising, events. And everything should fall underneath the story. Your company has to have the story, the overarching story that defines who you are, makes you interesting to people. And then that story trickles out through all these different channels obviously catered so it is appropriate for each channel, but it needs to be consistent everywhere if you're to be successful today, because we live in an era where I don't know about you, all you on the phone, but I get my information from a billion different places, including the media. But you know, you're sort of snacking on stuff everywhere, and so if you're a company, you need to make sure that when people are snacking on your content, it's always tasting like chocolate, and they're not getting chocolate on one channel and mustard on another channel. There, a little food reference, awesome. And ultimately, so here's why I think, you know, these claims of PR is dead is that, you know, you just have to roll your eyes. First of all, it always is and always will be the tip of the spear for big corporate initiatives. Why? Particularly with public companies, things have to start with an announcement, with a press release that you're telling to the world. You're required to do that. PR, by definition, has to be in early and deep on those situations. It should be the driving force behind advancing the company story. The press release section of your website should look like a chapter book that's telling your company story. Beyond that, though, PR, in my opinion, should be the keeper of the company story and the organization that forms the company story that the rest of the channels feed off of. And it remains the most impactful source of validated content. You know, we live in a world of content. Content is king. But, you know, companies spouting about themselves just isn't as impactful, as influential as when other people are talking about you, other credible people. So continuing to get media coverage that can then be used across other channels, or getting influencers talking about you, that is really critical today, because your own claims will only go so far. So I think PR today and moving forward will continue to be the engine that is driving the perception of your company in the market. So if we want to take a look at our PR programs, and if we say, oh, it's not dead, we should make sure it's strong and bring it to life. I think there are 5 steps that companies can take to doing that, and I've listed them out here. I'm not going to read them to you, but I'm going to dive into each one. Judgment-free evaluation. First step. Judgment-free is important. Everyone has an opinion about the program, but you need to put that aside and really collect information from all areas. So talk to your PR people, talk to your agency, talk to executives who are doing interviews, get information about the program, understand what's working, what isn't, what are the challenges, what is the company not delivering that it should. Just get all this information. Take a look at your peers then, and by peers I mean true peers. I can't tell you how many small networking startups we've had that want to measure themselves against Cisco. Well, that's kind of pointless. So figure out peers that are meaningful, that really look like you. They may even be companies that are not even in your specific vertical market, but have a similar profile in terms of size and import. And just try to get an understanding, how is my program stacking up with what looks like another good program for a company that I respect. And then once you've done that, naturally, you want to take a look at what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and what are the root causes of what's going on here. And there are all sorts of things you want to look at here, and then you want to look at the important things. So take a look at coverage, and are we showing up in the stories we should be in, or are we not? And if we're not, let's not just throw the poor PR guy under the bus or the agency. Let's understand why not. Are we not in those articles because actually we simply don't belong in them? Or are we not showing in the analyst reports because we're just really not quite the caliber of company they're looking to include? Or are we not delivering customer references and that was the price of admission for that article? Are we flat out boring? Are our spokespeople not doing the job when we get them on the line? All these things need to be considered if you really want to improve your program and understand why things are happening. And I get worried today. It's wonderful we have all these measurement tools, but very often I see that people aren't really digging into that why. And that to me is still largely a human task where you need to look at it, understand what's going on, and then understand the why. Take a look at the type of coverage. How much of it is transactional? Is it all just news pickup? And how much of it is creative? How many articles are being created out of thin air? Are you doing things to generate data and ideas that are getting reporters interested so they write articles? Because transactional coverage to me is sort of like when you hear people say, and I've heard this a few times, I only want an agency for arms and legs, which is basically, I'll give you the news and you pitch it to reporters and I'm done. But I think, great PR also involves brains, and that's creative PR. So take a look at how creative you're being. And if you're not being creative, why is that? Are you overloading your internal people in your agency with press releases so they simply have no time to be creative? Or are people just not being creative, in which case you got to look at getting people who are creative. But just because you're not being creative doesn't mean you don't have the ability to be creative. It could be that people are just being sidetracked by work that prevents them from being creative. Evaluating your corporate story. I'm taking another sip of water right now. Feel free to do so, everybody. It's stunning to me how many companies do not take the time to take a step back and look at their corporate story and understand, is this something that anyone would be interested in? I mean, it's amazing, it's particularly, again, we're in the tech space, how often companies immediately just default to a technical description of what they do versus coming up with a high-level story about why they're important. So, at the most basic level, you should look at your company or your client and say, all right, if I didn't know who these people are and I'm looking at their homepage and looking at their content, would I be interested in them? And what you really want to look for is a few elements. One, you need to have a drop-dead easy way to explain what you do. When I media train people, the metaphor I'll often use is pretend you're talking to a 12-year-old kid. Someone, it's a kid who's got a pretty good vocabulary, but isn't going to understand in-depth technical stuff. And when you put yourself in that mind frame, you tend to explain things very simply, and not stupidly, but simply, so anyone can understand. And that's really critical. So if mom can understand what you do, you're doing a good job with your corporate story. Another thing to look at is what's going on in the world that we could fit into. And it's amazing how you can take dull as dishwater technology or companies, but look at big things that are happening in the world and suddenly make them interesting. I was talking to someone earlier today, and they have a unit in their company that's a supply chain technology, which for those of you on the phone who've worked in that is, it's okay, but it's not exactly stuff that makes people want to drop everything and learn more. But when we look at some of the destabilizing events going on in the world right now with Brexit, with TPP, which obviously is going to be a huge point of contention during the presidential election, all those are sort of international disruptions that sort of speak to, I wonder what the impact of that could be on supply chains. And suddenly you've taken a boring subject, let's call a spade, and tied it to something that people are really interested in. And you can make your story, really bring your story to life that way. And providing proof points, obviously. It's wonderful to claim. You got to figure out some way to make it real. So obviously the most direct way to do that is to have customers, but we all know how hard it is to find customer references that will speak. So you should look everywhere for that and try to come up with as many proof points as possible, whether it's analysts, whether it's coming up with data, deployment numbers, anything like that. Fundamentally, though, someone needs to own the story, and this is where I see a lot of companies falling down. No one owns the corporate story, and so there often isn't a corporate story. There's a set of messages, but there's no big story. So think about who owns the story, whose job is it to develop that story, to understand it, to make sure everyone else in the marketing department understands it, and that they're all adhering to it, and that all their communications are boiling up to the story. Is it driving our communication strategy? All of this needs to happen, and to me, this is a natural function of PR. And today, where being interesting and having a story that's interesting to get attention in today's cacophonous world, that's a good word, having that story baked is absolutely strategic and critical. The structure. So like I said, I was a poor little PR guy sitting off in a corner office under leaky pipes when I was on the client side, and people looked in and wondered why I was getting a paycheck. And then, the rest of marketing was going out for wine and pizza at lunch and having fun. You really need to integrate PR with all the marketing department. It is not a separate function. In fact, it should be an organizing function. It should be the function that is setting the story that everyone is living by. So your structure needs to be that way. And when you think about just pure efficiency, you think of all the different functions we're looking at here that develop content. Well, you need that content to flow seamlessly across functions, because something people are publishing across your digital channels might be a great PR pitch, or might be a great idea for a webinar or a booth graphic. You need this flow of information today. You cannot have siloed functions in your marketing department. And you want to take advantage of all your brain power. Here at Lewis, when I took over as head of US PR, the first thing I did was to create a program where we can more readily tap all the brain power in the US. So we're talking hundreds of people. So when any account is having trouble, sort of hitting the creative wall that we all do, we bring in all sorts of domain expertise from all over the place, and we work it. And the more brains, the better. This really needs to happen in marketing departments today, and often it doesn't, unfortunately, because we have job descriptions that don't really mandate that. So once you've looked at all that, you can't change the past. What is it? And if you don't learn from it, you're doomed to repeat it. But look at the past, see what's happened, and make that the baseline for your program, so that start to establish metrics and say, okay, here's what we did in the past. Now we're going to implement all these cool improvements where we're going to integrate PR with marketing. We're going to have a great story. We're going to be really creative. And from there, you can start to really measure your progress from that baseline. And if you're working with an agency, you want to set goals. You want to work with the agency to set those goals, because you need goals to be realistic, and goals that consider the inputs, like the obvious ones, like the news pipeline, or the availability of spokespeople, or the availability of customer references, analyst references. But you want to understand what that complete collection of assets are before you can put together meaningful numbers around outputs. And I just want to take a moment to talk about PR measurement. As I said earlier, particularly in the tech space, where you're dealing with a lot of sort of binary people, and they want to know, I put $1 in, how much am I getting out? They often, when you talk about measurement, immediately what they're thinking about is ROI. And it's important to make it clear that I'm not going to tell you what the ROI is, but I will be able to instrument my program with this set of metrics, and that's going to enable us to identify anomalies and diagnose issues. So if we see that we're getting a ton of interviews but hardly any coverage, that's something we got to look into. And maybe it's because my agency is setting us up with the wrong interviews, or maybe it's because my spokespeople aren't any good, or whatever. But that's where measurement becomes useful, when you can really diagnose issues and correct them in your program. And again, you want to set the goals to real world conditions, so you're measuring meaningful stuff. My favorite thing is when you're working with clients and you have a really great year, and they say, great, let's increase our metrics by 10% next year. And it's like, okay, are we going to add 10% to the budget? Or are you going to give me 10% more news, or 10% more of anything? Nope. Okay, why would you expect that then? So let's look at what the inputs are and create really meaningful goals. So where can things fall down? Interesting question, Andy. Here are some traps. The first, obviously, is the definition of insanity. Do the same things year after year and expect different results. This actually speaks to what I just talked about. If you're going to do the exact same thing, well, don't tell people, get me 10% more results, because if you're not changing what's going in, you can't expect things to change coming out. Distractions. So if every product manager is screaming, do a press release, and you have to, you're not going to be able to do much pitching to anyone, and you wind up with press release mania, where you're spending all your time writing about version 1.02 of product X, and no time on the phone with reporters or coming up with creative ideas. paralysis by analysis. We had someone a couple years ago who was, and actually this gets back to my previous thing about we're shifting all our spend to inbound marketing. And he said, I don't want any coverage that doesn't include inbound links. And if the reporter won't agree to put in a link, I don't want to participate in the story. So, because he thought that's where all his leads are going to come from. And so naturally, it radically reduced the amount of coverage we got, and it really hurt the program. So it's important to instrument programs to measure the right stuff, but if you go too far, you can actually impair the program. Confusing activity with results. Goals really shouldn't just be, we're going to write this many press releases or do this many pitches. They really need to focus on the other half, which is, and we expect these results. Because at the end of the day, results are all that matters. It's like I always say to companies I'm talking to, like, look, if it takes me 15 minutes to get you into the Wall Street Journal, I assume you have no problem if I go out and play golf the rest of the day. They're like, nope, no problem. So results are what it's all about, baby. And trying to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of the good. We should not have version 29 of the press release. Let's get it there. Let's get it close to good, and we're out the door. But the biggest trap, and I know you've all been waiting for this. Can I have a drum roll, please? PR on autopilot. How many of us have experienced PR on autopilot? How much of us have committed the sin of PR on autopilot? Oh, and my examples, if some of you are young, these all pertain to the Coyote and Roadrunner hour. So go look that up online if you're not familiar with the Coyote and the Roadrunner. Hyperbole. I can't tell you how many years I've heard, don't use hyperbole. And yet hyperbole lives. And it's funny. So, you see stuff, the words like revolutionary, disruptive, and they just don't mean anything. They're just eye rollers. Like when you hear someone say, we have a disruptive technology, it's like, oh my God, all right, what do you have? And what's funny to me about these words is, if you think about it, they're not good words. If my kid's teacher calls me up and says, hey, your son's really disruptive, I'm not going to say, yes, he's disruptive. That's great. Or, revolution. I love revolutionary because, we're all in the U.S. here, and the American Revolution was good, but it's hard to find other revolutions that really turned out well, like the Cultural Revolution in China, the Communist Revolution in Cuba, or the Soviet Union, no. Actually, I was in the Czech Republic last week, and they had the Velvet Revolution. That was good. That was a bunch of students overthrowing the communist regime. But, so even in their literal definitions, these are actually negative words that companies are using because they think it makes them look really good. Doing what everyone else does. How many leading providers do we have on the phone? I did a search of, so what I'm referring to, obviously, is how 1 billion companies start their press releases with, Acme is the leading provider of Roadrunner eradication systems, or a variant thereof. I actually did a search on PR Newswire this morning, and by noon today, there were 33 companies that were leading providers. It just blows my mind. And what's really good is when it's a startup company with no customers, no revenue, but they're a leading provider. So if your client or your company is saying it's a leading provider, I'm going to suggest that somebody's brain is turned off, and we should back up and apply some thought to what we're writing about, and let's do something meaningful, and let's not use a term that's just going to make people roll their eyes. You're much better off just saying Acme is a provider. Because then at least you're not making people roll their eyes. Meaningless quote, and I love, I've been harping on this for years with my own people. Personnel releases, they're so awesome. Because anytime an executive is named, the CEO quote, and I swear to God, go look this up, go to PR Newswire, look up personnel releases. The CEO quote is almost always expressing how happy the CEO is. I'm delighted that Wile E. Coyote has joined Acme as our CTO, said CEO Chuck Jones, who is the creator of the Coyote Roadrunner Hour. Who cares how the CEO feels, other than maybe the CEO's mom? We don't care. And why squander that real estate by saying how happy your CEO is, instead of saying something like, you know, as a 20-year user of our eradication systems, Wile E. Coyote will bring valuable end-user experience to Acme as our CTO, or something like that, where it's meaningful and it actually says something. So these are all symptoms of creative autopilot. If you see hyperbole, if you see language that is simply what everyone else is doing and it's by default, or if we see quotes that are just throwaways and not really giving thought to what is the company story, how does this announcement play in and advance the company story, you need to tell someone to get off autopilot and start rewriting. And then that's not all, though, and that's not all. We have execution autopilot. Execution autopilot. So the first category of this, I would say, is onus avoidance, or planning for failure. So if you're telling your executives or you're telling your client, sorry, we can't get you business coverage without household name customer references, the end. You're not doing your job. You need to say, that's the best way to get it. However, there are some other things we can do and come up with other ideas. We can do a survey and come up with interesting data and hopefully hook someone that way. We can try to meet this reporter when you're in Houston next week for a cup of coffee or whatever. But, you know, instead of just saying that can't be done, let's think about ways where we can get it done. And this is all part of changing the perception of PR from something that should be dead to something that is saying, oh, this is possible, let's make it happen, and really adding value. Being a slave to conventional wisdom, the age-old PR rules. If I don't have news, I can't get you coverage. Well, then why have I hired you? So let's not be a slave to these things. No news? Okay, let's figure out other things we can do to get coverage. Let's think of thought leadership programs. Let's think of surveys. Let's think of graphical things we can do. Let's think about blog posts that we can repurpose. Let's really think beyond the conventional wisdom. Robotics. Yes, I think the email blasting engines in media databases is a scourge on our industry. And you know, we've seen articles in TechCrunch and other outlets with reporters who are expressing their frustration with PR people who send them pitches that have nothing to do with what they're trying to cover. And I attribute, now this has always been a bit of an issue, but it really became epidemic when we all had access to these blasting engines where I can go in, create a list, and now I'll just blast a pitch out to all 275 people on the list without really vetting them out and understanding what they write. So if we're just blasting releases to the same list of reporters, no matter what the release says, or we're just blasting pitches to a list without understanding who's on the list, we're engaging in robotic tactics, and that's another symptom of a PR program that is not functioning properly. And finally, hold the applause, expertise forfeiture. It's amazing how often we'll take guidance from someone who knows nothing about PR. The CEO is a brilliant man. He's running the company great. He's not a PR guy, though. And if he says, I want you to do this, and it's a bad idea, your job is to say, I'm sorry, Mr. CEO, I'm not so sure that'll work. But here's something that might work. And that's the way to do it, is never just say, no, that won't work. Always give an alternative. And we need to really, we need to defend ourselves and our expertise. You slave long hours doing this job. Don't be afraid to share your expertise. So finally, to sort of wrap this up, I just want to give a quick case study of a client of ours. And this was a case where you easily could say they're at the end of their life in terms of PR being of a whole lot of value. It was a client, they're called Safenet. They were acquired by a company called Gemalto a little while ago. But they're in the data encryption space, and the data encryption story, they've been around for like 30 years, and the data encryption story has been told to death. It's basically encrypt your data, and people can't steal it because it won't be usable. And once you've told that, all right, yeah, I get it. So we were working with them, and they needed to come up with a new way to breathe new life into this tired data encryption story. So we went on site with them. We sat down with a bunch of their execs and various other smart people, and we were thinking about ways, how do you take this old story, this old tired story, and make it interesting again? And so we started with coming up with an interesting concept, and we chose an oxymoron. Oxymorons are good because they get people to a place where they say, huh, what's that? And, that's what you want to have happen with your messaging. You want people to stop in their tracks and go, huh, what's that? So the oxymoron we came up with was this concept of a secure breach. How can a breach be secure, you ask? I'll answer. The notion being that we live amid a breach epidemic. Your perimeter defenses are useless, and you've probably been breached, you just don't know it. But if you're effectively encrypting your data, you're still secure. So that was the whole concept behind a secure breach. So we took that and then built out a whole marketing campaign around it, and it wasn't just PR, but it spanned the entire marketing department. And we actually named that campaign "Secure the Breach," and we launched it at the RSA conference, which is the biggest security conference every year in the U.S. And as part of that, we wrote a whole manifesto about why the world needs to understand what a secure breach is, and that you need to assume that you have been breached. If you're not assuming that, you're really going to be in trouble. And interestingly, there's been a lot written about that in the media subsequently. And then as part of that, we also we knew we wanted a mechanism that would keep yielding fruit for the long term. So we worked with an analyst to come up with a formula, the breach level index. And the idea behind this was during our meeting, we said, hey, what's interesting is the media is always covering breaches like it's one size fits all. All they say is company X was breached, 30,000 records were compromised, the end. But they're never talking about, well, what's the true severity of the breach? So if someone compromises 30,000 encrypted records, well, then it's really not that severe. They're not going to be able to do anything with the data. If they're compromising 30,000 readable social security numbers, that's a big deal. So he said, what if we came up with a way of rating breaches like we do for hurricanes? So category 1 is not a big deal. Category 5 is doom and destruction is headed your way. And so we worked with this analyst, and we came up with a formula, and we developed the breach level index and launched a whole website around it. And when we first released it back in 2015, it was huge. We got like 450 media hits, all the top tier guys. But we've been doing it quarterly ever since then, and it gets just tremendous coverage every quarter. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. And the company to this day, even though it's been acquired by Gemalto and is now called Gemalto, they are still using this campaign. So you go to a trade show, there it is, Secure the Breach. And this is an example of how PR was the tip of a spear for really reinventing a company and reinventing an entire marketing program. And this is, I think, when we look at the question, is PR dead? This is an example of how PR can just provide undisputed value. And it's not even about media coverage. It's about giving new life to a company by making it interesting. And to me, that is where PR should be playing. And then making sure that you've made them interesting. Now let's make sure that we're thinking about all our channels, not just media, not just analysts. Let's think about social, let's think about direct mail, let's think about everything and make sure we're being consistent across all the channels. And that to me is where we need to be PR-wise. We need to be at the top of that bar where we're saying, this is the story, now all of you, you're going to use it and you're going to make sure we're consistent across all channels. And so that concludes today's riff. I'm now saying I'm here to help, which I guess I am, Leah.
You are.
If anyone's interested in following up and has any questions or wants to talk to us about anything whatsoever, I could also discuss the Red Sox recent losing streak, which is distressing. Please feel free to reach out to me over email anytime. And then questions.
All right. So, well, first of all, thank you, Andy. That was good and entertaining. I giggled several times. So we do actually have some questions. So the first one, yes. Someone I think is looking for a little clarification. Is it clear that you only see PR under marketing, not as a separate entity responsible for the story image building of a company?
That is, well, that's a good question. And, you know, it depends on the company. for most of the clients we work with, it should be a part of the marketing department. However, with larger organizations, I could see it being a separate entity where marketing perhaps even answers to, I mean, the stories should be developed at the highest levels, and marketing should be taking that and using it across all the channels. So, I guess I'm going to be wishy-washy, so it depends on the channel. For most of the companies we work with, it absolutely should be part of the marketing department.
All right.
Is that a good answer?
That's a great answer.
Excellent.
This one, I'll take this one quickly. Someone wants to know if we will be sending out a copy of the slides, which we will be making available on SlideShare, and we'll be sending out a link to the actual full presentation once that's all available. So if not today, tomorrow, maybe early next week, but yes, you will definitely be getting a copy of the presentation if you'd like it. Someone else asked, you talked a lot about customer references and the importance of customer references. What's the best way to get them? Well,
first you want to have customers. Yeah. You're supposed to laugh. Okay. No, it's interesting. It's a challenge for a lot of companies to find customer references, and invariably the reason why it's a challenge, I mean, in some cases it's a challenge for reasons beyond anyone's control. Like in the security space, companies just don't want to talk about what they're doing with security for obvious reasons. You don't want Cozy Bear, who hacked the DNC, to know what you're using as a firewall. But for a lot of companies, the reason why customer references are so hard to come by is they simply don't have anyone in charge of getting customer references. It really needs to be a dedicated role where that's what someone is focused on. And it should be more than just media references, obviously. There should be someone in charge of understanding the complete referenceability of customers as a sales reference, as a marketing reference, as a media reference, as a blog contributor, you name it. But it's a big role, and it always interests me because customers are the most valuable asset companies have, and yet they often don't think it merits actually assigning someone to understand how to fully use them for benefit.
All right. Someone else is asking, what are some of the tools for measurement that you've found to be worthwhile?
Well, for that, I would defer to, so I'm generally not measuring our programs myself, but we use, I know we use Systemos extensively. A lot of people here are using that. The tools are constantly evolving. On the digital side, what's that one? It's people, God, I can't remember. We just adopted it like 2 months ago. I can get it, but I'm not using the tools, but they are evolving, and they are becoming increasingly, I think, valuable in terms of their accuracy. I have a funny story. We used to have a client that actually developed a tool for measuring the tone of articles, and so I tested them. I said, okay, search Hitler for me, and their way they indicated tone was a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So they search Hitler and it comes back thumbs up. I'm like, no, that cannot possibly be true. And it turned out it's because there was a documentary out that was really good about Hitler. So the tools have advanced since those days.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. All right. For the time being, we have one more. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them into the box. But my execs are talking a lot about a shift to social PR, which is definitely in the shiny new object category. How do I balance this with what basically he knows is the necessary, more traditional approach?
Well, balance is the word. It's fine to incorporate shiny objects. They're valuable. They're very valuable. But you need to understand you're adding something to the marketing mix. And, unless you have something that really is not yielding results, you don't want to be slashing other places to fund something new. You want to figure out how to incorporate something new without damaging the existing tools in your arsenal. Okay. Toolbox.
We have another one. I'm going to read this one slowly because I'm reading it live. All right. How do you see content and PR coordinating? Our company creates a lot of content, but it isn't bylined for an executive or subject matter expert, and is largely disconnected from the PR and marketing programs because content is sexy and PR equals press releases, which are boring.
Well, see, the content should be incredibly valuable to your PR program. So if I'm to understand, there's content being developed for other purposes here, but it's not being fed over to the PR side of the house. So, there's the simplest solution is let's get all the different people heading the different areas together to discuss what we're doing to understand what could be useful. And if you're developing content that's interesting about a topic that you want to get in front of customers, I guarantee you your PR program should be able to take that and either maybe not use it exactly as is, but massage it and turn it into something interesting, either for a byline placement, a pitch, a blog post. So content, it really is, we live in a world of content, and you really should look at every piece and figure out, how do I reuse that across all my different channels? So I think getting the people in charge together, though, it sounds basic and it sounds stupid, but that really is it. And say, look, we got this content, what can you do with it? And let's get people thinking about it. If you're just doing press releases, that's taking a fairly limited view of PR. PR needs to be more than that.
All right, we have another one. How do you feel about the value of direct mail and events versus PR and marketing to drive sales? In other words, in-person versus digital.
Well, again, I showed you the tool chest graphic with all the different functions. They should be complementary. So in terms of closing sales, yeah, in person. If you can get in front of people, that's the most direct way to get leads. The problem is people often will think of PR as a lead gen tool, and yeah, it will drive some leads, but really the reason to do PR is for awareness, that get people understand who you are and get people interested in you. And then when you reach out directly to them, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's an email solicitation, they're more likely to be receptive to that. So PR, you should think about it as something that makes all your other programs better. So ideally, if you're face-to-face at an event and people have read about you, they're going to come seek you out at your booth, and they're going to want to have a conversation with you. That's the role PR plays.
All right, we have one more. For your thoughts on this? They're saying, yeah, it's open-ended. It's like a theme question. Even ROI measurement, even with huge margin of error, can be useful to compare because the error is consistent as long as you combine impact with tonality. Thoughts?
If you can tell me, hold up an article your client's in and tell me what the return on investment in that article was, I'm all ears. I defy anyone to do that.
Right.
Sorry, I don't want to be argumentative, but hey, someone's holding up their hand.
So I agree with the challenge regarding the difficulty of measuring ROI. So what's our retort to the skeptical CEO who questions that investment?
That's an excellent question, Jay. This is Jay who's sitting at the table.
Yeah, we have a random guest star, but
he's waving at me.
He brought value.
So, and part of this is people say ROI and don't think about what it is. ROI is, as it sounds, it's I put $10 in, how much did I get back? That's my return on investment. If I put $10 into a PR program and I get a media placement and a bunch of people see it, I don't know what the overall impact of that is going to be over time. I just don't. However, the way to answer that is, do you think, Mr. CEO, that do you think it would be a good thing if people knew who you were? And do you think it'd be a good thing if people knew who you were, knew you for what you wanted them to know you for? So perhaps you have some baggage you don't want them to know you for, you have a new product, you want them to know you for that. And do you think your other programs will be more effective if people have heard of you and they have a favorable impression of you? Yes, okay, well then you have to understand that we cannot give you the ROI of PR, but we can show you what a good program should look like. We can show you what your competitors do, and we can try to structure a program that will be better than theirs, and we can assign measurement to that program to ensure that we are doing better than your competitors and that we are getting the right messages out to the market that you want, which will make all your other programs more effective. We are like BASF. We don't make the carpet, we make it better. That's my answer.
All right.
And I'm sticking with it.
Good for you. All right. Well, that was a really good Q&A. We got a lot of good questions. Of course, if anyone has any additional questions, you can always get in touch with Andy directly. You can get in touch with any of us on the webinars team. So I'm just going to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Andy for presenting. Thank you for Jay for some additional insight. If you don't mind just one more click to the next slide.
Oh, yes.
We do have a little commercial here. So I know there's a bunch of you online who have joined us for all 4 in our series of webcasts for Marketing at Mile 13. This was just a way of taking stock of marketing and PR programs halfway through the year, just to understand what's working, what's not, and how we can make things better so we can finish up strong at the end of the year.
By the way, this woman is standing on a scale and just achieved her weight loss goals.
Yes. So to go back, we have sessions on lead generation, we have sessions on analytics, we have a session on employee storytelling and leveraging your employee stories to strengthen your corporate story. And then we'll have Andy's up and running as quickly as possible too. So if you want to visit that link at the bottom, www.lws.co/mile13, you'll have access to all of those sessions. Again, thanks to everyone for joining us. We will get out links to the slide deck and to the presentation in full as soon as we can. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up. Otherwise, have a great day. Thank you.